December 26, 1944. Monte Belvedere, Northern Apennines, Italy. Through morning fog, Oberst Heinrich von Schellenberg watched American troops advancing toward his fortress. "Negroes," his briefing officer had reported with contempt. "The Americans have sent us their weakest troops." Former railroad porters playing soldier. Von Schellenberg, a Stalingrad veteran, studied the men through field glasses. The 370th Infantry Regiment, part of the U.S. Army's 92nd Infantry Division, an all-black unit in a segregated army sent to assault the most formidable German defensive position in Italy, the Gothic Line. Wehrmacht propaganda had prepared German soldiers to expect quick surrender from black American troops. Nazi racial theories declared African soldiers inherently inferior in combat, lacking discipline and courage for sustained fighting. What von Schellenberg didn't know was that marching toward his mountain fortress were men who had endured challenges no German soldier could imagine. They had fought racism in their own army, trained with inadequate equipment, and served under officers who expected them to fail. They carried a burden heavier than their packs, the weight of representing an entire race to a world that doubted them. Within 48 hours, von Schellenberg would send an urgent message to Field Marshal Kesselring's headquarters, a message that would force German commanders to reassess everything they believed about racial combat capabilities. The Germans had laughed, but the laughter died in the mountains. This is the story of how the Buffalo Soldiers of World War II transformed from objects of derision into the sledgehammer that cracked the Gothic Line. Subscribe to the channel if you never want to miss stories like this. Most people don't know this history exists. Help us change that. The 92nd Infantry Division activated in October 1942 at Fort Huachuca, Arizona. 15,000 black soldiers organized into 4 infantry regiments. Their shoulder patch bore a black buffalo, honoring the legendary Buffalo Soldiers of the Frontier Army. But pride couldn't overcome systematic obstacles. The U.S. Army remained rigidly segregated. Black soldiers lived in separate barracks, ate in separate mess halls, and trained under predominantly white officers, many from southern states where segregation was law. Private First Class Vernon Baker later recalled, "Some officers made it clear they expected us to fail. They told us directly that colored soldiers couldn't fight, couldn't lead, couldn't handle combat pressure. We trained twice as hard to prove them wrong, knowing we'd get half the credit." Training at Fort Huachuca proved brutal. Temperatures exceeded 110 degrees in Arizona's desert. Yet the division received inferior equipment, World War I surplus rifles, limited ammunition, the worst vehicles. Staff Sergeant Edward A. Carter Jr. wrote, "They give us the oldest rifles, the worst trucks, and officers who've never seen combat. Then they wonder why we're not ready. But we'll be ready. We have to be." The Buffalo Soldiers also faced racism beyond their posts. Towns near Fort Huachuca enforced strict segregation. Black soldiers in uniform were refused service at restaurants where German prisoners of war ate freely. The contradiction burned, fighting for freedom abroad while denied basic dignity at home. By June 1944, the division received deployment orders for Italy's Gothic Line, 200 miles of fortifications that Field Marshal Kesselring had spent 2 years building. The line incorporated 2,376 machine gun nests, 479 anti-tank positions, 120,000 meters of barbed wire, and extensive minefields. The Buffalo Soldiers would face this barrier with inadequate artillery support, inconsistent air coverage, and the burden of knowing that failure would confirm every racist stereotype. German propaganda already mocked their deployment. Wehrmacht intelligence dismissed black American troops as third-rate soldiers suitable only for labor duties. The division arrived in Naples in July 1944. General Edward M. Almond commanded, a Virginian whose racial attitudes were well documented. He openly doubted his soldiers' capabilities and maintained relationships with officers who shared his prejudices. Staff Sergeant Johnny Stevens recalled, "General Almond told us we had to prove ourselves, that people were watching. What he didn't say, but we all heard, was that he expected us to fail. That made us more determined than any pep talk could have. By December 1944, Allied commanders faced crisis. The Gothic Line remained unbroken despite months of attacks. Winter approached. General Mark Clark needed a breakthrough before snow made mountain warfare impossible. The mission given to the 92nd Infantry Division: assault the western anchor of the Gothic Line, capture mountain peaks dominating the Serchio Valley, and drive German forces back. Success would open the door to northern Italy. Failure would mean another winter of stalemate and confirmation of every racist assumption about black soldiers. The centerpiece of German defenses was Monte Belvedere, rising 3,830 feet above the Serchio Valley. From its summit, German observation posts could see 50 miles in every direction, calling artillery fire on any movement with devastating accuracy. Oberst von Schellenberg, commanding the 148th Grenadier Division, had supervised construction personally. Concrete bunkers with 3-foot walls protected machine gun crews. Mortars sat in covered pits, invisible to aerial reconnaissance. The mountains multiplied German effectiveness. A single machine gun could control an entire valley. Lieutenant Hans Becker wrote to his wife, "The Americans would need wings to reach us. The slopes are so steep that climbing without enemy fire would be difficult. Under fire, I cannot imagine how they could advance. The Negro troops they're sending will die before they reach our wire." German intelligence on the 92nd Infantry Division reflected Nazi racial prejudices. A November 1944 assessment stated, "American Negro units lack combat motivation. They will advance until meeting serious resistance, then retreat or surrender. Division is suitable only for defensive operations or garrison duties." This wasn't based on combat observation. It reflected Nazi ideology that declared non-Aryans inherently inferior. Wehrmacht training manuals advised, "Offer strong initial resistance. Negro troops will panic and flee. Their white officers will be unable to restore order." These assumptions created dangerous overconfidence. Von Schellenberg positioned forces believing black troops would collapse under artillery fire, never reaching his main defensive line. The Gothic Line's fortifications included S-mines, bouncing Bettys, that jumped 3 feet before exploding at groin height. Barbed wire obstacles, some 30 feet deep, forced attackers into killing zones. German defenders had registered every approach route with artillery. Weather became a German ally. November temperatures ranged from 40 degrees during the day to below freezing at night. Rain fell constantly, turning trails to mud. Morning fog prevented air support. Trench foot became epidemic. The 92nd's medical reports showed 847 cases serious enough for evacuation in November alone. Allied artillery and air support proved inadequate. Ammunition shortages plagued Italian operations. The 92nd received only 30% of requested ammunition, while priority went to France. Air support averaged fewer than 10 sorties daily compared to 100 plus in Northwest Europe. The Buffalo Soldiers studied their objective, knowing they would assault with inadequate preparation. They would attack at numerical parity against prepared defenses. No 3-to-1 superiority that doctrine required. Success depended on courage, determination, and accepting casualties that would horrify commanders who valued their soldiers equally. But these soldiers weren't valued equally. They knew it. The Germans knew it. Failure would confirm every racist assumption. That burden was heavier than the equipment they carried. December 26, 1944. H-hour, 0600. The attack would begin in darkness, on ice-covered slopes, against an enemy expecting them to fail. December 26th, 05:45 hours. Absolute darkness on Monte Belvedere's lower slopes. Men of Company C, 370 Infantry Regiment, checked equipment one final time. Every man carried 60 pounds up slopes where mountain goats struggled. Staff Sergeant Carter whispered final instructions. Stay low until artillery stops. Watch for mines. When we reach the wire, Bangalore torpedoes go first. Follow me through. If I go down, the next man takes over. We keep moving until we reach the top, or we're all dead. At 0600, American artillery opened fire. 2,400 rounds in 15 minutes, the maximum allowed. In his command bunker, von Schellenberg smiled. Only 15 minutes? The Americans are weaker than we thought. The Negro troops are coming. When artillery stopped, 30 seconds of silence. Then American voices shouted, "Move out!" And the Buffalo soldiers began their climb. The slopes averaged 45-degree angles, steep enough that soldiers grabbed vegetation and rocks to pull themselves upward. Some sections exceeded 60 degrees. Men carried rifles slung, needing both hands to climb. Combat loads became torturous after 100 yards of vertical ascent. Private James Hendricks described it. You'd climb 10 steps and need to rest, gasping. Your legs burned. Your shoulders ached. You knew if you stopped too long, you'd never start again. So you climbed, one step at a time, listening for the sound that meant Germans spotted you, machine guns opening fire. That sound came at 6:23. German MG-42s, firing 1,200 rounds per minute, swept slopes with interlocking fire. The first bursts caught Company C's lead platoon 400 yards from the summit. Men dropped, some hit, others seeking cover that didn't exist. Sergeant Carter saw 3 men cut down in the first seconds. "Keep moving!" he shouted. "They can't hit what's moving. Go!" German mortar fire arrived next, walking down the mountain. But the Buffalo soldiers didn't break. They kept climbing, using fire and maneuver tactics that white officers assumed they couldn't master. At 0647, Company C reached German wire. Bangalore torpedoes blew gaps through defenses. Germans responded with grenades. Private Vernon Baker, leading his squad through a breach, encountered a German machine gun firing down the gap. Baker charged the position alone, killing the 3-man crew with rifle fire and grenades. His squad rushed through, expanding the breach. Company B, attacking from the northwest, faced even worse terrain, a 70-degree rock face requiring ropes. German defenders, assuming no one would attack there, left the sector lightly defended. Captain John Runyon exploited this, leading his men up the cliff in darkness. At 0715, Company B's lead elements reached the summit ridge, the first Americans to penetrate the Gothic Line's main defenses. German defenders, shocked, fell back. But Runyon's company was isolated, exposed to counterattacks from 3 directions. Von Schellenberg refused to believe reports initially. Negro troops cannot have reached the summit. When confirmation came, his confidence shattered. He ordered immediate counterattack, 120 elite assault troops. The counterattack hit at 0745. Hand-to-hand combat erupted in fog and smoke. Soldiers fought with rifle butts and entrenching tools when ammunition ran out. Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers, leading a platoon, charged into enemy fire when Germans threatened to overwhelm his position. He killed 7 German soldiers with his BAR before being killed himself. His sacrifice gave Company B time to reorganize and hold. By 0830, the counterattack stalled. Company B still held their foothold. 34 killed, 52 wounded out of 97 who attacked. But they hadn't broken. Germans, expecting Negro troops to flee, faced soldiers fighting with ferocity that stunned them. Lieutenant Becker later wrote, "We killed many, but they kept coming. We threw them back, but they attacked again." These were not the weak soldiers our intelligence described. They fought like demons. We began to understand racial theories were lies, but learned this truth too late. Throughout the day, additional companies assaulted Monte Belvedere. By 1400 hours, American soldiers held multiple summit positions. Artillery support improved as forward observers called fire from the peak. The 600th Field Artillery Battalion fired 1,800 rounds that afternoon. The battle raged through December 26th and 27th. German counterattacks came every few hours, determined efforts to throw Americans off the summit. Each was beaten back by soldiers who refused to descend, defeated. Ammunition ran low. Food was non-existent. Water froze. Men fought on adrenaline and determination. By December 28th, the 371st Infantry Regiment controlled Monte Belvedere's summit. Germans, recognizing they couldn't dislodge Americans, withdrew to secondary positions. The Gothic Line's western anchor was cracked. The cost was devastating. The 370th suffered 573 casualties out of 2,800 engaged. Company B was reduced to 31 effectives from 97. But they had succeeded where German commanders said Negro troops must fail. Private Baker, surveying the battlefield, December 29th. Bodies everywhere. Ours and theirs, frozen where they fell. Some of our men climbed wounded, bleeding, dying, but still climbing because stopping meant the man behind you died. We proved something on that mountain. We proved we could fight. But my God, the cost. German assessments underwent immediate revision. A January 1945 intelligence report to Kesselring stated, American Negro units demonstrate combat effectiveness equal to white divisions. Previous assessments based on racial theory were incorrect. These troops fight with determination and accept casualties that would break lesser units. January 1945 brought savage winter. Temperatures plunged to 10 degrees at night. Snow accumulated to 3 feet. Wind speeds exceeded 40 miles per hour, driving wind chill to -20. Monte Castello, connected to Belvedere by narrow ridge, became the next objective. Germans reinforced after losing Belvedere. The assault began January 24th with critical support. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team, the decorated Japanese-American unit attached to the division. The tactical plan reflected lessons learned. Night attacks would exploit American advantages while negating German artillery. Most importantly, the offensive would continue regardless of casualties until objectives were secure. Lieutenant Colonel Virgil Miller briefed commanders, "We are taking Monte Castello and holding it, period. I don't care how many counterattacks they throw. We're staying on that mountain until relieved or dead. Make sure your men understand there's no falling back." The night attack jumped off at 0400 on February 19th. The 442nd struck from the north, while the 370th assaulted from the east. The combination of Japanese Americans fighting to prove loyalty and black soldiers fighting to prove equality created overwhelming force. By 0630, both units reached Monte Castello's summit simultaneously. German defenders attempted counterattacks, but faced attackers already dug in. Positions that had dominated approaches for months were overrun. Von Schellenberg sent urgent message to Kesselring. Monte Castello lost. American Negro and Japanese units fighting with exceptional determination. Gothic Line Western Sector compromised. Request permission to withdraw. Kesselring denied it. Hold at all costs. Monte della Torraccia must not fall. But von Schellenberg knew his position was untenable. The final assault on Monte della Torraccia came February 21st. 3 regiments supported by the 442nd, British artillery, and, for the first time in weeks, clear weather allowing air support. P-47S strafed German positions, while B-25S dropped 500-pound bombs on bunkers. The combined assault shattered German resistance in 6 hours. By 1800, on February 21st, American soldiers controlled all 3 peaks. The Gothic Line's western anchor had fallen to troops German propaganda said couldn't fight. The cost was staggering. December 26th through February 21st, the 92nd suffered 2,187 casualties, 419 killed, 1,611 wounded, 157 missing. Individual companies reduced to 40% strength. But German losses were catastrophic differently. They lost positions that could never be retaken. The Gothic Line's integrity was broken. Kesselring's defensive masterpiece had a gaping wound through which Allied forces would pour. A captured German officer interrogated February 23rd. "We were told colored soldiers would run at first shot. Instead, they climbed mountains under fire that should have stopped any attack. They suffered casualties that would have broken German units and kept advancing. I fought Soviet Guards divisions on the Eastern Front. These Negro soldiers fought just as hard, maybe harder, because they seemed to have something to prove." With the Gothic Line broken, Fifth Army's spring offensive exploited gaps, driving toward the Po Valley and forcing German surrender in Italy on May 2, 1945. But the broader significance transcended military operations. The Buffalo Soldiers shattered assumptions about race and combat capability that had persisted for generations. They proved that when given adequate support and opportunity, black soldiers performed at the same level as any troops in the world. Recognition came slowly. 7 members earned the Medal of Honor, though 6 awards weren't approved until the 1990s. Vernon Baker, whose courage on Monte Belvedere was undeniable, received the Distinguished Service Cross in 1945, downgraded from Medal of Honor recommendation. Only in 1997, 52 years later, was his award upgraded. He was the only living recipient among the 7. General Mark Clark's assessment reflected the era's racial attitudes. The 92nd Infantry Division has performed creditably. Their success demonstrates that with proper training and leadership, Negro troops can contribute meaningfully to combat operations. Field Marshal Kesselring's post-war memoirs showed greater honesty. The American Negro divisions in Italy fought with distinction. Our intelligence assessments, based on racial theories, were completely wrong. These soldiers demonstrated courage equal to any forces I faced in my career. The soldiers returned to an America where victory abroad hadn't won equality at home. Black soldiers who fought through the Gothic Line came home to segregated buses, Jim Crow laws, and legal discrimination. Many were denied GI Bill benefits. Some were attacked for wearing uniforms in southern states. Private Hendricks, who survived Monte Belvedere, was refused service at a Georgia diner 3 months after returning. When he protested, showing his combat infantryman's badge and Purple Heart, police beat him. "I took Monte Belvedere," Hendricks said years later, "but I couldn't get a hamburger in my own country." Yet the legacy endured. Their success contributed to arguments for military integration. President Truman's Executive Order 9981 in 1948, which desegregated the armed forces, cited black units' combat record as evidence segregation weakened military effectiveness. Vernon Baker, receiving his Medal of Honor in 1997 at age 77, addressed the ceremony directly. "The award is welcome, but it's 52 years late. 7 of us earned this honor. 6 had to die before America saw fit to give it to them. That tells you everything about the country we fought for and the country we came home to." Today, Monte Belvedere stands quiet. A memorial erected in 1995 bears the names of those who died. The inscription is simple. They proved themselves here. Baker, interviewed before his 2010 death, was asked what he wanted people to remember. Remember that we volunteered to fight for a country that treated us as second-class citizens. Remember that we proved ourselves against an enemy who thought we were inferior, while serving in an army that agreed. Remember that we took mountains white units had failed to take, then came home to a country where we couldn't vote, couldn't get jobs, couldn't live where we wanted. But remember most of all that we did it anyway. We fought anyway. We proved ourselves anyway. The story of the 92nd Infantry Division is ultimately about human dignity and refusing to accept limitations imposed by prejudice. The Buffalo Soldiers climbed those mountains carrying the aspirations of millions of black Americans demanding recognition of their full humanity. The Germans laughed at the deployment of black troops to Monte Belvedere. But the laughter died in the mountains, drowned out by men who refused to quit. refused to break, refused to accept anyone's judgment of their worth except their own. They were told they couldn't fight. They were given the worst assignments. They were expected to fail. Instead, they took the mountain, broke the line, and changed history. The Germans had laughed. The Buffalo Soldiers had the last word.